I told my mother-in-law she's the reason her son and I almost got divorced. I didn't plan to say it at her birthday dinner. 30 people, a restaurant she'd picked, my husband Dan sitting right next to me. But she'd been doing this specific thing for 6 years, and she did it one more time, and something in me just stopped caring about the occasion. The thing she does is this. Anytime Dan and I have a problem, and every marriage has problems, she inserts herself in a way that always, without fail, ends up making it worse. When we argued about money in year 2, she told Dan I was financially irresponsible and offered to help him open a separate account. When I had a miscarriage in year 3 and needed space to grieve quietly, she organized a family prayer circle at our house without asking me and invited 15 people over on a Saturday. When Dan and I hit a real rough patch last year, the kind where we were sleeping in separate rooms and talking to a therapist, she called him every single day and told him that marriage was hard and that some people simply weren't meant to go the distance. She said that to my husband while we were in couples therapy. Some people simply weren't meant to go the distance. We got through it. 7 months of therapy, a lot of honest conversations, and we got through it. Dan acknowledged she'd crossed lines. He talked to her. Whatever he said, it didn't land because 3 months later she was back to her usual rhythm like nothing had happened. At her birthday dinner, she made a toast. She thanked everyone for coming, talked about family and what it meant to her, and then looked directly at Dan and said she was grateful every day that he'd stayed true to himself through everything life had thrown at him. Dan shifted in his seat next to me. My sister-in-law Rachel looked at her plate. I picked up my wine glass and put it back down without drinking. After dinner, people were milling around and she came over to me and said she hoped I'd enjoyed myself and that she was glad things were better between Dan and I. She said it like she'd helped, like she'd been on our side the whole time. I looked at her and said, "Can I say something to you honestly?" She said of course, that's what family was for. So I told her she was the reason Dan and I almost didn't make it. That every time we tried to find our footing she'd called him and pulled it out from under us. That the prayer circle was one of the most violating things anyone had ever done to me in my own home. That telling your son some people aren't meant to go the distance while his wife is sitting in a therapist's office trying to save their marriage wasn't support. It was sabotage. That I'd been nothing but respectful to her for 6 years and I needed her to understand what she'd actually done to us. Her face went completely still. Dan appeared from nowhere and looked between us and said, "What's going on?" His mom's eyes filled up and she said, "I just attacked her at her own birthday dinner." Dan looked at me and I told him exactly what I said, word for word. He closed his eyes for a second. Rachel had drifted close enough to hear everything and wasn't pretending otherwise. My mother-in-law said she had only ever tried to support her son and she was sorry if I'd taken it the wrong way. I told her I hadn't taken anything the wrong way. I'd taken it exactly the way she'd meant it. Dan took my arm gently and walked me to the other side of the room. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He just said, I know. We left 20 minutes later. She hasn't called the house since. Dan spoke to her once and came home quiet and didn't share what was said. I didn't ask. Rachel texted me privately and said it needed to be said and she was glad someone finally did. I don't know what happens from here, but I meant every word and I'd say it again.